The thunder roared across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1873, as Xavier Cole's stallion kicked up dirt beneath the darkening sky. Through the haze of the approaching storm, he spotted a figure stumbling along the trail, a woman whose once fine dress was caked with mud, her hair wild as the coming tempest. Something in her determined stride, despite her obvious exhaustion, made him pull his horse to a halt. The rain began to fall as Xavier approached, yet the woman didn't flinch. When she turned toward the sound of his horse, he saw a fierce determination burning in her eyes that contradicted her bedraggled appearance. Those eyes, amber with flecks of gold, held more fire than fear. "Madam!" Xavier called out, tipping his hat despite the worsening weather. "Storm's coming in hard. My ranch is just over that ridge." She straightened her spine, one hand clutching a small leather satchel to her chest. "I don't accept charity from strangers, sir." Xavier couldn't help but laugh, a deep rumble that matched the thunder overhead. "Charity would be leaving you out here to drown or catch your death. Stubbornness like that, fire in your eyes despite all this mud, that's my kind of wife." The woman's eyes widened, then narrowed suspiciously. "I am nobody's wife, sir. Least of all yours. Name's Xavier Cole," he said, extending a hand down from his horse. "And I wasn't proposing, just making an observation. Now, you coming along, or you planning to outrun that wall of rain heading our way?" After a moment's hesitation, she took his hand. "Felicity Thornton." Xavier swung her up behind him, feeling her reluctant arms circle his waist as the heavens truly opened above them. "Hold tight, Miss Thornton. Rusty here moves quick in a storm." The journey to Xavier's modest ranch took less than 15 minutes, but by the time they arrived, both were soaked through. The small cabin appeared through the sheets of rain, a lantern already glowing in the window. "Miguel must have lit it before heading to his quarters," Xavier explained as he helped Felicity down from the horse. "He helps around the place." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what Felicity assumed were bedrooms. The warmth from the banked fire embraced them immediately. "You can have my room tonight," Xavier said, grabbing a towel from a hook and offering it to her. "I'll take the chair." Felicity clutched the towel but didn't move to dry herself. "Why are you helping me?" Xavier's weathered face softened slightly. "Out here, we help folks in need. Questions come later." He moved to stoke the fire. "But since you're asking, where were you headed, all alone on that road?" Felicity's posture stiffened. "Away. That's all you need to know. Running from something, then?" Xavier nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "Or someone." A flash of that fire returned to her eyes. "My business is my own, Mr. Cole." "Fair enough." He pointed to the door on the right. "Clean clothes in the chest. They'll be too big, but they're dry. I'll heat some stew." Left alone, Felicity cautiously entered Xavier's bedroom. It was sparsely furnished with a bed, chest, and small table. A faded photograph of a woman sat atop the chest. Carefully, Felicity opened the chest and found men's clothing, shirts and trousers that would indeed swallow her whole. After changing into a flannel shirt that hung to her knees, she used it as a nightgown, wrapping a belt around her waist to give it some shape. She emerged to find Xavier stirring a pot over the fire, his own wet clothes changed for dry ones. "Hope you like venison stew," he said without turning. "It's what we've got." "I'm grateful for anything warm," Felicity replied, taking a seat at the small wooden table. As they ate in silence, Felicity studied her rescuer. Xavier Cole was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples despite appearing to be only in his mid-30s. His face was tanned and lined from years under the sun, but his eyes were a startling blue, perceptive and direct. "So," Xavier finally said, breaking the silence, "you planning to tell me why a woman like you was wandering alone on a Wyoming trail in a storm?" Felicity set down her spoon. "A woman like me? Educated. Well-bred, from the sounds of it. That dress might be muddy, but it's fine quality." His eyes met hers. Not exactly common out here. She looked away. As I said, I'm traveling. Without a horse? Without supplies? Xavier shook his head. That's not traveling. That's escaping. Felicity stood abruptly. I thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Cole, but I don't owe you my life story in exchange for a meal and dry clothes. Xavier raised his hands in surrender. You're right. My apologies. He stood and cleared their bowls. Get some rest. We can figure out your next steps in the morning. After Xavier had retired to his makeshift bed in the chair by the fire, Felicity lay awake, listening to the storm batter the cabin. She had not told him about the men who might be following her, or why she had fled into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the contents of her satchel. She fingered the edge of the rough blanket, so different from the silk sheets she'd known in Philadelphia. 2 days ago, she'd been Felicity Thornton, reluctant fiancé to one of the city's most influential businessmen. Now she was a fugitive, running from a man whose cruelty she'd discovered too late. Morning came with clear skies and the smell of coffee brewing. Felicity emerged to find Xavier cooking eggs over the fireplace. Your dress is still damp, he said by way of greeting. You're welcome to wear my things until it dries properly. Thank you, Felicity said, accepting the steaming mug he offered. I can't impose on you much longer. Is there a town nearby where I might find transportation? Xavier turned the eggs in the pan. Nearest town is Prosperity, about 20 miles south. I need to head that way myself today. You're welcome to ride along. Felicity hesitated. I have very little money. Wasn't asking for any. Xavier slid the eggs onto 2 plates. But if you're particular about earning your keep, I could use help with some mending. Miguel tells me I sew like a blind man with mittens on. Despite herself, Felicity smiled. I can sew. After breakfast, Xavier introduced her to Miguel, a middle-aged Mexican man who managed a small herd of cattle and helped with the horses. His eyes widened slightly at Felicity's presence, but he greeted her respectfully. We're heading to town, Xavier explained. Should be back before sundown. Miguel nodded. I will watch the place, Chief. The ride to Prosperity was conducted mostly in silence. Xavier wasn't a man for idle chatter, and Felicity was lost in her own thoughts. She rode pillion behind him again, her borrowed trousers and shirt covered by a coat that engulfed her small frame. Prosperity was barely more than a wide spot in the road: a general store, saloon, small church, telegraph office, and a handful of other buildings clustered together as if for protection from the vast wilderness surrounding them. Wait here, Xavier said as they stopped outside the general store. People will stare less if I go in alone. While Xavier was inside, Felicity remained on the horse, acutely aware of her strange appearance. She noticed a posting board outside the telegraph office and felt her heart skip a beat. From this distance, she couldn't read the notices, but she knew what they might contain. Xavier returned with a small bundle. Got you some essentials. Figured you might need them. Felicity started to protest, but he was already moving toward the telegraph office. Need to send a wire. Won't be long. Left alone again, Felicity's anxiety grew. She watched as people passed, nodding politely at her but clearly curious about the strange woman in men's clothing sitting atop Xavier Cole's horse. A group of riders appeared at the far end of the street, and Felicity's blood ran cold. There were 3 of them, dusty from the trail, and though she couldn't make out their faces at this distance, something about their bearing made her heart pound. When Xavier emerged from the telegraph office, she was nearly frantic. We need to leave. Now. Xavier followed her gaze to the approaching riders. Friends of yours? The opposite, she whispered. Without asking further questions, Xavier swung up behind her and turned the horse, taking a side street out of town. They rode hard for several minutes before he slowed to a more sustainable pace. Care to explain who we're running from? He asked, his voice close to her ear. Felicity's hands trembled on the saddle horn. Men who work for my former fiancé, I believe. He He won't accept that I've broken our engagement. Xavier was quiet for a moment. Rich man, is he? Powerful? Yes. Very. And dangerous? Felicity closed her eyes briefly. I discovered he's involved in terrible things. When I confronted him, She couldn't finish. Xavier's arm tightened slightly around her waist as he controlled the horse. Say no more. We'll take the long way back to the ranch. They circled wide around Prosperity, adding hours to their journey. By the time they approached the ranch, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the prairie. Miguel! Xavier called as they rode in. We may have trouble. Miguel appeared from the barn, his expression questioning. Miss Thornton has some unwelcome followers. If any strangers come asking, you haven't seen her. Understand? Miguel nodded gravely. See, Chief. I understand very well. That night, over a simple dinner, Felicity finally told Xavier her story. How she'd met Frederick Montclair at a society function in Philadelphia, been charmed by his sophistication and apparent kindness. How her father, impressed by Frederick's business acumen and wealth, had encouraged the match. I was raised to be obedient, she explained, staring into her cup. To make a good match and be a proper wife. But then I found papers in Frederick's study documents showing he was involved in smuggling, in exploiting Chinese laborers, She swallowed hard. In selling young women to certain establishments. Xavier's face darkened. And when you confronted him? He became someone else entirely. Threatened me, my family. Said no one would believe me over him. Felicity's hands shook. So I ran. Took a train west as far as my money would carry me, then started walking. I thought if I could reach California, disappear completely. Why not go to the authorities? Felicity's laugh was bitter. Frederick owns half the police in Philadelphia. And out here? A woman alone, making accusations against a powerful man back east? Who would believe me? Xavier was quiet for a long moment. I would. The simplicity of his statement brought unexpected tears to Felicity's eyes. You don't even know me. I know enough, Xavier replied. I know you've got more courage than sense, walking alone into the wilderness rather than stay with a monster. I know you've got fire in those eyes, even when you're afraid. He smiled slightly. And I know that any man who has to threaten a woman to keep her is no man at all. For the first time since she'd fled Philadelphia, Felicity felt something like hope. What do I do now? For tonight? You sleep. Tomorrow, we figure it out. Xavier stood and added wood to the fire. You're safe here, Miss Thornton. I give you my word on that. The next morning brought a steady rain that kept them confined to the cabin. Xavier taught Felicity how to clean and load his revolver. Just in case, he'd said while she mended several pairs of his work pants that had seen better days. You never mentioned what brought you out west, Felicity said as she stitched a torn seam. Were you born here? Xavier shook his head. Boston, originally. Came west after the war. You fought? Union cavalry. His expression turned distant. Came home to find my fiancé had married my cousin while I was away. Decided there wasn't much left for me there. Felicity nodded toward the photograph she'd seen in his room. Was that her? No, Xavier said softly. That was my sister, Elizabeth. She died of tuberculosis while I was fighting. Never got to say goodbye. I'm sorry, Felicity said, truly meaning it. Xavier shrugged. It was a long time ago. Came out here, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved enough to buy this place. It's not much, but it's mine. It's peaceful, Felicity observed. Beautiful, in its way. Xavier looked at her with something like surprise. Most Eastern women find it desolate. Maybe I'm not most Eastern women. The words came out more defiantly than she'd intended. A smile tugged at the corner of Xavier's mouth. No, Miss Thornton. I don't believe you are. 3 days passed in relative calm. Felicity found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life, helping with cooking and mending, even learning to collect eggs from the few chickens Xavier kept. She wore his clothes, rolled up at the sleeves and legs, and found them far more practical than the corseted dresses she'd known all her life. On the fourth morning, Miguel rode in from the direction of Prosperity, his expression grim. "Men in town asking questions," he reported to Xavier. 3 men, well-dressed but hard eyes. Offering money for information about a woman traveling alone. Xavier glanced toward the cabin where Felicity was preparing lunch. "Did they show a picture? Give a name?" "No picture, but they say her name is Felicity Montclair. They say she is mentally unwell, that her husband fears for her safety." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Husband?" "So they claim." "What else?" Miguel lowered his voice. "They stay at saloon. They drink and talk loosely. One brags that when they find her, they will teach her obedience before taking her back." Xavier's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Anything else I should know?" "They pay well for information. Some people in town, they already talk about a strange woman seen with Xavier Cole." Xavier nodded grimly. "Thank you, Miguel. Keep your eyes open." When Xavier told Felicity about the men in town, her face drained of color. "They're calling me his wife? Frederick and I never married." "Men like that, they twist the truth to suit their needs," Xavier said. "But they don't know for certain you're here. We have time to think." "Time for me to leave, you mean?" Felicity said quietly. "I brought danger to your door. I should go." Xavier's expression hardened. "Running alone is what got you into this mess. Besides, where would you go?" "I don't know. Further west. Somewhere they wouldn't follow." "They'd follow," Xavier said with certainty. "Men like that don't give up easily. And a woman alone has little chance out there." Felicity stood suddenly, that fire flaring in her eyes. "So what would you have me do? Hide here forever? Put you and Miguel at risk? Or perhaps I should just surrender, go back to a man who sees women as property to be traded?" Xavier stood too, his height making him imposing despite his gentle tone. "There's another option. You could fight." "Fight? How?" "I told you, no one would believe my word against Frederick's." "Maybe not in Philadelphia," Xavier agreed. "But out here, things are different. If you had proof those papers you mentioned—" Felicity's hand went to her satchel, which she kept with her always. "I took what I could, but it's hardly conclusive without context. Just shipping manifests, some correspondence in code." "Let me see," Xavier said. They spent the afternoon poring over the documents Felicity had stolen. Xavier's experience in business, something he hadn't mentioned before, proved valuable as he pieced together the pattern in the shipping records. "This is definitely suspicious," he said, pointing to recurring shipments from China that disappeared from official records upon reaching San Francisco. "And these letters?" He tapped a page covered in what appeared to be innocent business correspondence. "There's definitely a code here. But it's not enough, is it?" Felicity asked. Xavier's expression was thoughtful. "Maybe not on its own. But combined with your testimony, and if we could find others who've been victimized." "You're talking about building a case," Felicity said slowly. "As if we could take this to a court." "Not just any court. The federal marshals." Xavier sorted the papers carefully. "Trafficking Chinese laborers, forcing them into servitude, that's a federal crime. So is transporting women across state lines for immoral purposes." Hope flickered in Felicity's eyes. "Do you really think the marshals would listen?" "I know a man," Xavier said. "Served with him during the war. He's a federal marshal now, based in Cheyenne. If anyone would take this seriously, it's him." For the first time, Felicity allowed herself to imagine a future beyond running. "But Frederick's men will find me before we can reach Cheyenne." Xavier smiled, a determined glint in his eye. "Not if they're looking in the wrong direction." The plan they devised was simple but risky. Miguel would ride to a neighboring ranch, spreading word that he'd quarreled with Xavier and quit, and that he'd seen Xavier helping a woman head north toward Montana Territory. Meanwhile, Xavier and Felicity would travel south and east to Cheyenne, taking little-used trails and avoiding towns. "It's 3 days hard riding," Xavier explained as they prepared supplies. "We'll need to travel light and fast." Felicity, now dressed in trousers and a shirt that Miguel's wife had altered to fit her better, nodded resolutely. "I can ride. My father insisted I learn, though ladies in Philadelphia only ride side saddle for leisure." Xavier's eyebrow raised. "You're full of surprises, Miss Thornton." They set out before dawn the next morning, leaving Miguel to implement his part of the plan. Xavier led them through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate: rocky outcroppings, dense patches of forest, across shallow parts of rivers rather than using bridges where they might be seen. By midday, Felicity's muscles ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she refused to complain. Xavier seemed to sense her discomfort nonetheless. "We'll rest here," he said, stopping in a sheltered grove near a small stream. "Eat something, stretch your legs." As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Xavier studied her with undisguised admiration. "Most city women would be complaining by now. Would that help?" Felicity asked dryly. "Make the journey shorter or the saddle softer?" Xavier laughed, the sound warming her more than the spring sunshine. "No, but it's what I'd expect. I've had to adjust my expectations considerably these past weeks," Felicity said. "I expect you have too." "How so?" She gestured to herself. "When you found me on that road, did you expect to be harboring a fugitive and planning to confront one of the most powerful men in Philadelphia?" Xavier's smile was genuine. "When I saw that fire in your eyes, Miss Thornton, I knew you weren't an ordinary woman. Though I'll admit, I didn't anticipate quite this level of adventure. Do you regret helping me?" she asked, suddenly serious. Xavier's blue eyes held hers steadily. "Not for a moment." Something passed between them then, something unspoken but powerful. Felicity looked away first, her cheeks warming. "We should continue," she said, gathering their meager supplies. They made camp that evening in a hollow protected by large boulders. Xavier built a small fire, keeping it low to minimize visible smoke. "First watch is mine," he said, checking his rifle. "I'll wake you in a few hours." Felicity wrapped herself in the blanket he offered. "I've never slept under the stars before." "No? Then you've missed one of life's simple pleasures." Xavier settled against a boulder, rifle across his knees. "City lights dim the stars. Out here, you can see the universe laid bare." Felicity looked up at the vast expanse above them, more stars than she'd ever imagined possible. "It's beautiful. Makes one feel very small." "Small, but part of something greater," Xavier agreed. "That's what I love about this country. The vastness of it reminds a man of his proper place in the world." Felicity studied him in the firelight, this man who had upended his life to help a stranger. "You're not what I expected either, Xavier Cole." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it seemed to please him. "Oh? And what did you expect? From a Western rancher? Someone rougher? Less thoughtful?" She pulled the blanket closer. "You speak like an educated man. Harvard class of '58, Xavier said with a hint of irony. "My father was determined I'd join the family shipping business." Felicity sat up, surprised. "You never mentioned that. It's not a life I think about much anymore. That Xavier died somewhere on a Virginia battlefield." He poked at the fire. "Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not where he came from. Is that why you stayed? After the war?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Partly. But mostly because the East felt confining after all I'd seen. Out here, there's room to breathe, to be whoever you choose to be." Felicity considered his words as she drifted toward sleep. Freedom to be whoever she chose to be, it was a revolutionary concept for a woman raised to fit a predetermined mold. They continued their journey at first light, making good time across the rolling Wyoming landscape. By midday of the third day, Cheyenne appeared on the horizon, a bustling railroad town that served as the territorial capital. "We'll find Marshal Reed first," Xavier said as they approached the outskirts. "Best not to show ourselves too openly until we know he can help." The federal marshal's office was located near the courthouse, a modest building with the U.S. flag flying above the door. Xavier instructed Felicity to wait in a small cafe across the street, while he went to find his old comrade. Felicity sat nervously, a cup of coffee growing cold before her, as she watched the marshal's office. After what seemed an eternity, Xavier emerged with another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a serious expression and a silver star pinned to his vest. They crossed to the cafe, and Xavier made quick introductions. "Felicity Thornton, this is U.S. Marshal James Reed. Jim, Miss Thornton is the woman I told you about." Marshal Reed's handshake was firm, his assessment of her quick but thorough. "Miss Thornton, Xavier tells me you have evidence of serious federal crimes." Felicity pulled her precious satchel closer. "I do, Marshal. Though I fear it may not be enough on its own. Let me be the judge of that," Reed said. "But not here. My office is too public. I have rooms where we can speak privately." Reed's private quarters were above a mercantile, simple but comfortable. There, Felicity laid out her evidence and told her story in full, including details she'd been too embarrassed to share with Xavier: how Frederick had gradually isolated her from friends and family, how his charming facade had cracked to reveal controlling, sometimes frightening behavior. "And you discovered these documents how?" Reed asked, examining the papers. "Frederick was hosting a dinner party. He was called away to his study but didn't return promptly. I went to find him and discovered his safe open. He'd been showing something to a business associate, and was interrupted. When they stepped out together, I looked inside. Felicity's hands trembled slightly. I knew immediately what I was seeing was wrong. I memorized as much as I could, then later that night, I returned and took what papers I could." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "Montclair. The name's familiar." He pulled out a folder from his desk. "We've had reports about suspicious shipments connected to his companies, but nothing concrete enough to act on." Hope surged in Felicity's chest. "Then you believe me?" "I believe you discovered something illegal, yes." Reed's expression was cautious. "But building a case against a man of Montclair's standing will require more than these fragments. We need witnesses, corroborating evidence." "The women," Felicity said suddenly. "The ones being transported. If we could find them, that's a start," Reed agreed. "And there's a Chinese labor camp near the railroad construction that's had several workers escape recently. They've been telling stories that match what you're describing." Xavier, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "So you'll investigate?" Reed nodded slowly. "I will. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy. And Miss Thornton will need to remain available to testify when the time comes." "You mean I can't go home?" Felicity said flatly. "I mean it wouldn't be safe," Reed corrected. "Montclair already has men looking for you. If they find you before we build our case, I understand." Felicity interrupted. "But where am I to go? What am I to do?" Xavier and Reed exchanged a look that Felicity couldn't quite interpret. "I have a suggestion," Xavier said carefully. "But I don't want you to feel pressured." Reed stood. "I'll give you two a moment to discuss it. I need to send some telegrams anyway." After he left, Xavier turned to Felicity. "You could come back to the ranch. Stay there while Reed builds his case." Felicity's heart raced. "But the men looking for me will be busy dealing with federal marshals asking questions about their employer," Xavier finished. "Besides, the ranch is remote. Few people know it exists, fewer still how to find it. I couldn't impose on you further." Felicity protested weakly. Xavier's expression softened. "It's not an imposition if I'm offering freely. Besides, you've proven yourself useful. Those shirts haven't been so well mended in years." Despite everything, Felicity smiled. "Is that all I am to you? A seamstress?" Xavier's gaze held hers, suddenly serious. You know it's not. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither had acknowledged aloud. Felicity looked away first, her cheeks warming. I accept your offer, she said quietly. Thank you. They left Cheyenne the next morning, after Reed had taken formal statements and made copies of all Felicity's evidence. Their return journey was less hurried but no less cautious, with Xavier still choosing paths less traveled. As they rode, Felicity found herself studying Xavier's profile against the vast Wyoming sky. In the short time she'd known him, he had become something unexpected in her life, a protector, yes, but also a friend, and perhaps something more. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After Frederick, she had sworn never to trust a man so completely again. Yet Xavier had proven himself trustworthy in ways Frederick never had. Penny for your thoughts, Xavier said, catching her staring. Felicity smiled. I was just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I was preparing for a society wedding in Philadelphia. Now I'm riding across Wyoming in trousers, a wanted woman. Regrets? Xavier asked, his tone light but his eyes searching. No, Felicity said with surprising certainty. Despite everything, I feel more alive now than I ever did in Philadelphia. They arrived back at the ranch to find Miguel waiting anxiously. His relief at seeing them safe was palpable. No trouble while we were gone? Xavier asked as they unsaddled the horses. None, Chief. I spread the story as you said. Even went to saloon in Prosperity to complain loudly about my former employer. Miguel grinned. Those men, they left 2 days ago, riding north very fast. Xavier clapped him on the shoulder. Well done, friend. That night, after a proper meal and a bath, Felicity sat by the fire, wearing a simple dress that Miguel's wife had altered for her. Her hair, growing out from the severe cut she'd given it during her flight from Philadelphia, curled softly around her face. Xavier joined her, offering a mug of coffee. Comfortable? Very, Felicity admitted. Though I've grown oddly accustomed to trousers. Dresses feel restrictive now. Xavier laughed. Wear whatever suits you. Out here, practicality trumps convention. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, Felicity asked the question that had been on her mind since Cheyenne. How long do you think it will take for Marshal Reed to build his case? Xavier considered. Months at least. These investigations move slowly, especially when the target is powerful. Months, Felicity repeated softly. I'll need to find some way to support myself. I can't live on your charity indefinitely. It's not charity, Xavier said firmly. You earn your keep. Besides. He hesitated. I've grown accustomed to having you around. Felicity looked at him, really looked at him, the strong profile, the kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow, the hands that were both gentle and capable. I've grown accustomed to being around, she admitted. Something shifted between them then, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building since that first rain-soaked encounter on the trail. Xavier set his coffee aside and turned to face her fully. Felicity, I want to be clear about something. You're under no obligation to me. If you want to leave, find work in town, or even move on elsewhere, I'll help you. Your life is your own now. The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. How different he was from Frederick, who had seen her as a possession to be controlled. What if I don't want to leave? She asked softly. Xavier's eyes darkened. Then you'd be welcome to stay. For as long as you wish. Felicity reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing his. And if what I wish is to stay indefinitely? Xavier's hand turned, capturing hers. Then I'd be the happiest man in Wyoming Territory. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Felicity learned the workings of the ranch, insisting on pulling her weight beyond household tasks. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle, even to shoot. Xavier was a patient teacher. Letters came regularly from Marshal Reed, updating them on the investigation. Progress was slow but steady. Chinese laborers had been found willing to testify. A woman rescued from a San Francisco brothel had identified Frederick Montclair as the man who had arranged her transport from Philadelphia with false promises of respectable work. "It's really happening," Felicity said one evening as they read Reed's latest letter. "Frederick might actually face justice." Xavier squeezed her hand. "You made it happen. Your courage started all of this." Their relationship had evolved cautiously, respectfully. Xavier never presumed, always asked permission before even the simplest touches. They had shared kisses, first tentative, then increasingly passionate, but Xavier refused to rush her, understanding the shadows Frederick had left on her heart. Summer turned to autumn, bringing cooler air and golden light to the prairie. Felicity had fully embraced ranch life, her city pallor replaced by a healthy glow, her hands no longer soft but capable. She had even begun keeping the ranch accounts, discovering a talent for business that her finishing school education had never nurtured. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors, Xavier turned to her with unusual seriousness. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he began, his usual confidence seemingly diminished. Felicity's heart quickened. "Yes? These past months having you here, it's changed everything. This place was just somewhere I lived before. Now it feels like a home." He took her hand. "I know your life has been in upheaval, and the last thing you need is pressure from me. But I need you to know how I feel." Felicity squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Tell me. I love you, Felicity Thornton. I think I started falling in love with you when I saw that fire in your eyes, standing in the mud in that ruined dress." His smile was tender. "I said then you were my kind of wife, and I meant it, though I barely knew you." Felicity's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. "Xavier, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking anything of you right now. I know you're still healing, still finding your way. But when this is all over, when Montclair is brought to justice and you're truly free." He took a deep breath. "I want to ask you properly then. To be my wife. Not because you need protection or a place to stay, but because we choose each other, freely and completely." Felicity's heart felt too full for her chest. The man before her had shown her what love truly was, not possession or control, but partnership and respect. "I don't need to wait until then to know my answer," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I love you too, Xavier Cole. You saw me at my worst and believed in me anyway. You gave me safety when I needed it most, but more importantly, you gave me the freedom to find myself." Xavier's eyes shone with emotion. "Is that a yes? It's a ask me properly when this is over, and you'll get your answer," Felicity said with a smile. "But in the meantime..." She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Xavier responded with equal passion, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her closer. Winter descended on Wyoming with fierce determination. Snow blanketed the ranch, transforming it into a pristine wilderness. Inside the cabin, Felicity and Xavier created their own warmth, their love growing stronger as they faced the challenges of the season together. News from Marshal Reed came less frequently, slowed by winter conditions, but each letter brought progress. Witnesses had been deposed, evidence collected. The case against Frederick Montclair was building. In January, as a blizzard howled outside, a rider appeared at the ranch, Marshal Reed himself, half frozen from his journey. Once thawed by the fire and fortified with hot coffee, Reed delivered his news. "We've done it," he said, his exhaustion evident but his satisfaction clear. "Federal indictments have been issued for Frederick Montclair on multiple counts: human trafficking, labor violations, witness intimidation, and more." Felicity could hardly believe it. "He's been arrested?" Reed nodded. "Taken into custody 3 days ago. His associates, too. It's been in all the Eastern papers." He pulled a folded newspaper from inside his coat and handed it to her. The headline was unequivocal: "Philadelphia magnate arrested in trafficking scandal." Beneath it was Frederick's photograph, his handsome face set in a scowl as he was led away by authorities. "It's really over," Felicity whispered, her hands trembling. "Not quite," Reed cautioned. "There will be a trial. And you'll need to testify, Felicity." Xavier's hand found hers, warm and reassuring. "When?" "Spring, most likely. In St. Louis." Reed looked at Felicity apologetically. "I know it's asking a lot, but your testimony is crucial. You were the one who discovered the evidence, who made the connections." Felicity straightened her spine, that familiar fire kindling in her eyes. "I'll be there. I want to look him in the eye when I tell the world what he's done." Reed smiled approvingly. "I thought you might say that." He reached into his coat again and pulled out an official-looking document. "This is a federal protection order. Until the trial is concluded, you remain under the protection of the U.S. Marshal's Service. No one can force you to return to Philadelphia or to have any contact with Montclair or his representatives." Felicity accepted the document with a sense of wonder. "Thank you, Marshal Reed. For everything." Reed waved away her thanks. "You did the hard part, Miss Thornton. I just followed where the evidence led." After Reed had retired to the spare room for a much-needed rest, Felicity and Xavier sat by the fire, the newspaper spread between them. "How do you feel?" Xavier asked gently. Felicity considered the question. Vindicated. Relieved. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Free." Xavier lifted her hand to his lips. "And what will you do with that freedom?" "First, I'll testify. I'll make sure Frederick pays for what he's done." Her expression softened. "And then, Xavier Cole, I believe you had a question you wanted to ask me." Xavier's smile was brighter than the fire. "Yes, madam. I believe I did." The trial of Frederick Montclair became a sensation across the nation. Newspapers from San Francisco to Boston covered the proceedings, detailing the web of corruption and exploitation the prominent businessman had created. Felicity's testimony was pivotal. Dressed simply but elegantly, she faced her former fiancé across the courtroom with unwavering resolve. Frederick's attempts to paint her as mentally unstable or vindictive fell flat against her clear, detailed account of what she had discovered. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Felicity felt no triumph, only a profound sense of closure. Frederick was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for interviews, but Felicity declined them all. Her focus was on the tall figure waiting patiently at the bottom of the steps, Xavier, dressed in his best suit, looking both proud and slightly uncomfortable among the city folk. "Ready to go home?" he asked when she reached him. Home. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. "Yes," Felicity said, taking his arm. "I'm ready." They returned to Wyoming in the glory of late spring, the prairie awash with wildflowers. The ranch looked smaller after the grandeur of St. Louis, but infinitely more welcoming. Miguel and his wife had prepared a celebration dinner, and the small cabin was filled with warmth and laughter. Later, as twilight settled over the land, Xavier led Felicity to the porch. "I've been carrying this since before we left for the trial," he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. "Wasn't sure when the right moment would be." Felicity's heart raced as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "It was my mother's," Xavier explained. "Been in a bank box in Cheyenne all these years. Had Miguel fetch it while we were away." He dropped to one knee, his blue eyes earnest in the fading light. "Felicity Thornton, when I found you on that road, covered in mud but with fire in your eyes, I said you were my kind of wife. I didn't know then how right I was." He took her hand. "You're the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not because you need protection or a home, but because I love you more than I thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side?" Tears of joy spilled down Felicity's cheeks. "Yes, Xavier Cole. 1,000 times yes." The ring slid onto her finger, as if it had been made for her. Xavier rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Prosperity, with Marshall Reed standing as Xavier's best man and Miguel's wife, Elena, attending Felicity. The entire town turned out for the celebration, curious about the Eastern woman whose story had appeared in newspapers across the country. Felicity wore a simple white dress that Elena had helped her make, her hair adorned with wild flowers. Xavier couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him, that familiar fire in her eyes now tempered with profound love. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and respect each other, to face life's challenges together, to build a home founded on love and trust. "I never expected to find you," Xavier said as he slipped the wedding band onto her finger. "But now I can't imagine my life without you. You saw me when I was at my lowest," Felicity replied, her voice steady despite her tears. "And you said I was your kind of wife. I promised to be worthy of that faith every day of our lives together." Life settled into a new rhythm after their marriage. The ranch flourished under their combined care, Xavier's practical knowledge and Felicity's head for business proving a formidable combination. They expanded their cattle operation, added more land, even built a larger cabin with proper glass windows and a stone chimney. Letters occasionally arrived from Philadelphia. Felicity had reconnected with her parents, who had been horrified by Frederick's crimes and relieved to discover their daughter was safe and happy. They promised to visit when the railroad made the journey easier. A year after their wedding, as summer once again painted the prairie in vibrant colors, Felicity shared news that brought tears of joy to Xavier's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" Felicity nodded, her own eyes shining. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. By winter we'll be 3. Xavier gathered her in his arms, his joy too great for words. This woman who had stumbled into his life with mud on her dress and fire in her eyes had transformed his existence in ways he could never have imagined. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Xavier marveled at the journey that had brought them together. "When I found you on that road," he said, his arm around her shoulders, "I never imagined we'd be here now." Felicity leaned into him, her hand resting on her stomach where their child grew. "I was running away that day. I never dreamed I was actually running towards something far better." Xavier kissed her temple. "You know, I meant what I said that first day. That fire in your eyes, that determination even when you were exhausted and afraid, that's still my kind of wife." Felicity smiled, turning her face up to his. "And you, Xavier Cole, are exactly my kind of husband." As darkness fell over the Wyoming prairie, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, their hearts full with the love they had found and the future they were building together, a future born from a chance encounter between a woman with mud on her dress and fire in her eyes, and a man wise enough to recognize his kind of wife when he saw her. Their child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Xavier's sister, was born on a snowy December night, bringing new joy to their growing home. She had her mother's amber eyes and her father's determined chin, and from her first cry, it was clear she had inherited Felicity's spirit. As the years passed, the Cole Ranch became known throughout the territory for its hospitality and fair dealings. Felicity established a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers, putting her Eastern education to unexpected use. Xavier's cattle operation expanded, and their reputation for quality drew buyers from as far away as Chicago. They faced challenges: drought years, harsh winters, the inevitable conflicts that arose as more settlers moved west, but they faced them together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. 3 years after Elizabeth's birth, twin boys joined the family, James and Thomas, named for Marshall Reed and Felicity's father. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, becoming a proper ranch house with separate bedrooms for the children and a library filled with books that Felicity ordered from Eastern publishers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children play in the yard of the home they had built together, Xavier took Felicity's hand, his expression reflective. Do you ever miss it? He asked. Philadelphia society, the life you were born to? Felicity considered the question seriously, as she did all things. Sometimes I miss certain comforts, hot baths that don't require hauling water, concerts, bookshops. Her smile was radiant as she squeezed his hand. But I never miss who I was there. That woman was a shadow of who I've become here, with you. Xavier's kiss was tender, filled with the love that had only deepened over their years together. Thank you for stumbling onto my trail that day. Thank you for stopping, Felicity replied, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched their children, their legacy of love, chase each other through the golden Wyoming sunlight, their laughter a testament to the home they had created together. And whenever a storm rolled across the prairie, bringing thunder and rain that reminded them of their first meeting, Xavier would look at his wife still with that fire in her eyes, though the mud was long gone, and say with a smile, "Still my kind of wife." To which Felicity would always reply, her heart full of the love they had built together, "And you, Xavier Cole, are still exactly my kind of husband."